Autumn for Black Tree, written and read by Oliver Tonic. This is a completed novella, read as a series. Enjoy the story from here on, or start from the beginning with the first episode. And now, back to the tale. Episode 3, A Dissuaded Investigation. Barley's bark reached up to the knuckles on the back of his hands, leaving his palms and fingers smooth. They held a bright yellow oval fruit that had small indents on it of dark purple. He handed it to Paxis once he had found her in the market where she was shopping for the ingredients for the next day's meal. "Oh, thank you." Her face lit up when she saw it. "I remember you said on our trip here that your favorite is the Mackay fruit." "Yeah, it is. That's really sweet of you," she said, pocketing it. "No problem at all." Barley leaned on the side of one of the food carts. "So I know you were giving me a dead end before, but I'll ask again. Is there anything that you need help with in your town?" "And I'm still telling you I'm fine. It's okay." She was picking a dried fruit, keeping her eyes roving for the best ones as she spoke. "But see, that's not what I heard," he said. "What did you hear?" "That you have monster troubles, like reputation preceding type." She gently bit her lip and raised her eyebrows, but she still wasn't looking at him. "You heard that, huh?" "Well, is it true?" he asked. She paused her fruit picking. Barley wasn't sure if this was to measure her next words or if she was trying to figure out which cart to search through next. "We definitely have a monster problem," she said, finally choosing another ingredient. "You do? And is that something I could look into for you?" Paxis sighed. "Look, I helped you because it was the right thing to do. I brought you here because it seemed better than you being cooped up inside that tree, but I wasn't trying to bring you here and make you fix all my problems." "I know that," Barley insisted, "but you admit you have problems." Paxis scoffed. Barley considered for a moment. "Listen, if you won't assign me a task, then I'll look for something I can help you with." Paxis didn't reply at first. "All right," she said finally with hesitation. "I'll start with this," he said, "but as soon as there's something you decide you want me to investigate more, I'm ready." She tried to conceal her smile at his persistence. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" he asked. "Okay. Barley smiled and leaned off the cart. "If you need me, I'll be put up by the king and queen in a visitor's home not far from the palace." As he left, Paxis called after him. "Hey!" The knight turned around. "You're a good guy, Barley," she said. He walked backwards, calling out to her. "You can tell me that once I've solved your problem. You aren't making this easy, you know." Paxis shook her head as he continued on his way. Barley spent the rest of the day searching the town for clues. He found there were many warning posters nailed to trees warning the villagers of the creature of the night, telling them to stay alert and vigilant. He took one and began questioning the townsfolk. They were surprised to have a knight in their midst inquiring of their situation, but were generally kind and helpful. Some told him of their experiences, confirming that the monster was primarily only spotted at night, and there wasn't much to find of it during the day. No one knew exactly what it looked like or where it went during the daylight hours, but they all claimed the devastation caused after the sun went down was immense. On the back of the poster, Barley wrote down some of the most consistent details he heard from people. It seemed the monster had not killed anyone. Though rumors persisted that it was deadly, no one could verify or agree on a single victim they knew that was hurt. What they did all agree on was that the monster destroyed crops and property in mass. The people's crop yield was in dire straits. Some were hardly able to feed their families. Barley continued to check in at regular intervals at Pax's home to discuss his findings, but she was consistently nowhere to be found. He finally returned later in the day. Barley appeared quickly in her doorway shortly after she entered. She turned around and smiled at him, holding an apron. "The one I had was dirty. I had to come back and grab the one I washed yesterday," she told him. Barley handed her a piece of paper. Paxis looked at it and saw that it was the wanted poster. It had no illustration, but it had large letters indicating to report any sightings of a strange and unknown creature of the night. "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad? To hear the people tell it, this is a plague," he said. He flipped it over and showed her the notes he had been taking on it. Paxis studied it a moment. "Conducting interviews, I see," she said, handing it back. She began gathering a few more things around her home. The king and the queen seem fairly concerned about this. Isn't this something you need help with? Your people are starving, for God's sake. With all due respect, Barley, you chose to put yourself in debt to me. I had no desire to have a knight in my charge, she said. Barley sighed and watched her prepare to leave. He looked down at his notes. Look, your life here doesn't look easy. I feel like I can't walk away from this until it's fixed. Regardless of if you have another problem you need fixing, this seems pressing enough. Paxis was in the doorway and stopped. She was quiet for a moment. Turning to him, she said, Forgive me. I do not have the words to express where there is a need, but I will not be ungrateful for whatever assistance you choose to lend me. With that, she turned away and headed back towards the palace. That night, after the market had closed and the streets were empty, Barley headed back to his quarters. It was a nice little cottage fitted out with amenities for visitors. The king and queen servants had left food for him on the table, an assortment of breads and fruits along with some dried meat. Barley collected twigs off of his body that he had sprouted unintentionally throughout the day and built a fire in the fireplace, using it as kindling. He then used the fire to light the lamps around his temporary home to stave off the night a bit longer. He commenced the process of using his shears to cut off any vines that had held his armor to his body, so he could remove it and sleep unencumbered. Because of this, he preferred to only wear his armor when he knew he had something to slay that day. He found himself deeply relieved to peel it off and test his limbs' range of motion with some stretches. He ate some, but his mind was occupied, so it wasn't much. He began to store the rest of the less perishables away when he heard a knock at the door. He opened it and found King Farron standing before him. "Good evening, knight." Barley bowed slightly. "Your Highness?" They looked at each other for a moment in silence. The king was alone, and Barley thought it strange that he was out making a call to him at night without soldiers or palace guards. "May I?" the king asked. "Of course," said Barley, gesturing for him to have a seat at the table. The king sat, and Barley went for his store of food. "Can I get you anything? I only have a few things left." No, that's fine," said the king. "I ate before. I just thought we'd talk, as we haven't been properly introduced." Barley thought this an odd thing to say. "I apologize, sir. I had assumed our previous introduction was sufficient." "I can see you've taken an interest in our closest servant girl," he said, ignoring Barley's statement. Barley raised an eyebrow. "I owe her a debt. As I previously had said, she told me a bit of the story. I'm sure a damsel saving you was an attractive reversal for you. She is appealing, is she not?" "I suppose she is," Barley said carefully. "I didn't say anything about her beauty, but it's clear you're taken by it, then." "I didn't say anything about—" "I don't want to hear excuses," the king interrupted again. "I know exactly why you're here." Barley was taken aback by his abruptness. Although it came off rude, the king didn't seem angry, but strangely smug. "As I said before, I feel indebted to the girl." The king said again. "You did say that. I think you're lying to yourself about your lot in life, about what you want but can't have and can't ever be. I know what it's like. It's easier to live that way." Barley frowned. "Sir, I'm afraid I don't understand what you're trying to say." "Listen, you're here and I'm here. Let's just talk like men." "Okay." Barley wondered how they had been talking before. "You want to solve our monster problem, and that means you'll have to look closely at our affairs. You'll learn about our land. You'll see things you may not be accustomed to. I want you to know that going in." Barley looked at him and slightly cocked his head, but said nothing. "Don't act like you don't understand. I know what you're here for." "Your Highness," said Barley carefully, "how about you tell me why I'm here?" "Oh, you know," the king persisted in his smug grin and shook his finger at him. "You know, all right." Barley was quickly losing patience with this conversation. He finally decided on removing him from the room as quickly as possible. "Well, I'd better get some rest tonight so I can get back to that thing I'm here for, whatever it is," he said, laughing awkwardly and standing up so as to hint for him to exit. The king stood up and leaned close to Barley, closing the gap between them in a way that Barley found uncomfortable. "What happens," Farron said, "when you face off against a monster you can't defeat? When your reputation as a hunter is in question because you met an insurmountable task?" Barley took a step back. They stared at each other for a while Farron's eyes locked with his. This was clearly a strange and clumsy attempt at intimidation. He just couldn't quite figure out why. Well, and don't tell me you would know what to do, because you can't. No one can know what the future holds. You can't be ready for everything, the king said, cutting him off again. Barley gritted his teeth. He had handled many types of personalities and people in his life. It was part of his job. But he found this man to be uniquely frustrating and incomprehensible. What exactly did he want him to say? He took a deep breath before he answered, choosing his words carefully. I have a responsibility to the people, just as you do. When unforeseen challenges arise, my responsibility to care for the ones I serve moves me to find a way around my problem, no matter how insurmountable. King Farron looked at him, still close to his face. He was still and silent for some time. Barley couldn't tell exactly what he saw in his eyes, but it looked like frustration. Very well, then, he said finally. Good rest and good hunting, Sir Barley, and may your love for the people guide your quest. The last thing the king said rang disingenuous to Barley as he led him out the door. He watched through the window as the king left, wondering what exactly had transpired between them. He watched as he began to fade into the dark, but before he disappeared, he saw him stop and rub his shoulder awkwardly. As he did, something fell from his sleeve and landed on the path. Then he was gone. After he was sure he was far enough away, Barley stepped out of his cabin. He went to discover what it was and pocketed it in a pouch around his waist.